Happy Friday, everybody. Joining me today for a special edition of the Hot List is author David Shoemaker. He's a contributor to Deadspin and Grantland, and he has a new book out called The Squared Circle, Life and Death of Professional Wrestling. We have it right here, and he joins us here in the Blaze newsroom. David, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. So I have to confess, your publisher sent 3 copies of this book. It was all I could do to hang on to this last one. The men in my office were so intrigued. You call wrestling, I have it written down here, America's greatest mythological sport. Tell us about the thrill and the fascination we have with pro wrestling.
Well, I mean, it's a really weird form. Part of why I wanted to write the book is because has a lot of history, and it's very, very like steeped in American history, and most people just disregard it because it has this weird, thing about being a fake sport. I joke around and say that it's like a cross between like a medieval morality play and a comic book. I mean, it's just like these larger-than-life superheroes that are on screen and battling good versus evil for everybody. And for a generation, many generations of young boys, of which I was one, it's incredibly captivating.
Well, you grew up in Kentucky, and you said that this was like the biggest thing going on the weekend.
Oh yeah, Memphis wrestling on Saturday mornings, and then WWF wrestling would come on right after that on the national telecast. It was really just a formative experience. This is where you learn everything about like I said, good versus evil. You learn about love for the first time watching some of these shows. Miss Elizabeth, people like that. And there's it reflects our culture so much that you see elements of everything. There's when America goes to war, there are wrestlers that go to war. It's geopolitics and race. I mean, every subject is reflected in the wrestling ring.
Yeah, tell us about that. Tell us about how wrestling reflects our political, our cultural preoccupations, our fears, our hopes, some of the great characters that we sort of played out the geopolitical game.
Yeah, I mean, the famous one from my childhood was when Sergeant Slaughter turned evil and became an Iraqi sympathizer during the first Iraq War. In real life, he was getting like death threats. They had to put his family into hiding because people were really mad. It's like
they didn't know that it wasn't real?
Yeah, there's always that weird tension in wrestling, right? I mean, when I started writing the book, I decided I'm not going to go back to ancient Greek wrestling, or the wrestlers will tell you that there's wrestling in the Bible. It goes back that far, But I decided I would start writing the book at the moment when wrestling turned fake. So I sort of brought it back to the old carnival sideshows and right. America around 1900, and that's when it was all kind of a carny put on, and it went forward from there. So there's always this weird tension between real and fake, and I think the best way to explain it is, most fans know it's fake, and the guys who are in charge of the wrestling promotions, they know that but it's this sort of suspension of belief where we're all in agreement that we're going to pretend it's real for the sake of the product.
Right. Well, in your glossary, you mentioned the word kayfabe.
Kayfabe.
Kayfabe, and this is where the wrestlers have to maintain character 24 hours a day.
The Macho Man, Randy Savage, my personal all-time favorite, but one of the sad parts of his life is he became the Macho Man full-time, and you hear the story about other guys too. But he had this deep, gravelly voice, and he taught himself to talk like that 24 hours a day. Mm-hmm. He became this sort of a conspiracy theorist, this very protective of Miss Elizabeth, his real-life girlfriend, to really, really unfortunate degrees. And you kind of lose touch with reality when you're playing this fiction your whole life.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. So, I'll confess, I've never actually watched a pro wrestling match.
Well, maybe after this.
Maybe after this I will. But you know what? I'm aware of Andre the Giant and WrestleMania. Mm-hmm. How is it that pro wrestling has seeped so deeply into our popular culture?
Well, it's like I was saying, it reflects our culture. So, I mean, it's a really, really, it's a good way of communicating with culture in a lot of ways. You see these things on screen that are reflective of what happens in real life. But I think more than that, it's just this pure escapism, and it's real, and for
not unlike a mid-afternoon soap opera.
Well, a lot of people will say it's like soap opera for men, and I don't deny that. There's a lot of athleticism involved, and these guys really do beat themselves up. The matches the endings are predetermined, but it's a lot of physical, athletic endeavor that's really impressive to watch once you get attuned to it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, it's been a part of our culture, like I said, since you can trace it back to 1900, and it's been 52 weeks a year, new product every week, right. And so it's like once it gets its claws in you, it doesn't let go because there's always new stuff. You can be a fan of a movie franchise, but you get like 4 or 5 of those in your life. This is every week a new product, and it's just this larger than life. But yeah, I mean, these are tough guys. These are guys who like to think of themselves as
they're in character
as gods.
24/7,
exactly.
Right.
So sometimes just to settle it better to prove a point. Maybe you'll lay into somebody a little bit harder than you would. You'll cuff his ears. You'll, twist his arm a little bit harder. At the end of the day, they all take care of each other. and they have each other's backs in real life when they get into bar fights to defend wrestling. That sort of, I mean, that kind of stuff happened in the 70s all the time.
So any truth to the wrestler Mickey Rourke when he's like, you know, putting staples in his body?
Well, that's a more of a modern thing, but yeah, that's definitely part of kind of the indie scene, is that they'll just do whatever it takes to kind of get a reaction from the crowd, and it kind of reached this point where, you know, punching and kicking weren't enough. We got to find more realistic ways to convey violence and pain. Thankfully, from my point of view anyway, there's less of that now. I mean, it's gone back to a more kind of representational violence. But yeah, I mean, the wrestler was very, very accurate. It crammed a lot of stuff into a short period, as all movies do. But yeah, there's all that stuff really happens.
All right, so quickly before we go,
All right.
you grew up with wrestling. Clearly, you're a wrestling fanatic. Who's your favorite wrestler?
Macho Man Randy Savage, I say, but I really have.
Why?
He was just so compelling. If you go back and watch him now, his interviews and in the ring, he was just working on a higher level than everybody else. He was you can't look away from him from the point that you start. But I will say, I also write in the book about, there's a lot of guys in here, but Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig was the first bad guy that I liked. And as a kid, I had no idea why I liked him, because I knew I wasn't supposed to. But
Why
there's
was
something.
he a bad guy if he was called Mr. Perfect?
Well, he was a perfectionist. He thought he was the best at everything. He called himself Mr. Perfect. He could, you know, throw a football and catch it himself in the end zone for a touchdown. He could hit the three-pointers. Like, he was the perfect athlete. But he was just so compelling, and I couldn't figure out why. Yeah, it's so true, right? And it's not just me. There's a whole generation of guys that grew up loving Mr. Perfect, and you know, they turned out to be snarky writers like me, probably. So.
All right, David, congratulations on your book. It's called The Squared Circle: Life, Death, and Professional Wrestling. It was great to have you in the newsroom, and good luck.
Thanks.
All right, thank you.